And brilliant show.
Probably like around 4 minutes we'll wind things down and Hi, welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm Tammy White. I'm the founder of the Bobby White Foundation, and I'm here with a super special guest, Steve Hopper, but he's just going to have to sit still for just a second because I really want to thank John and Cage, because we wouldn't be here doing this without them and without Cage behind the scenes, Area 52 Media Group, and of course our sponsor, DeLynn Gaston from the mortgage firm. Anything mortgages, people from the very beginning, if you don't even know what you're doing or you don't have the credit, all the way to second mortgages, whatever. This woman knows it all. So please support her. She's really happy to ask any kind of questions and help you out. Whatever it takes, she's there. So we have Art for Hope coming up, and actually my guest Steve here was probably the first keynote speaker for Art for Hope. So this is our 6th annual one. Again, it's going to be held at the Hilton Garden Inn at Suncoast in 54, September 7th, which actually would have been my mom and dad's 62nd wedding anniversary. Wow. I was really hoping Mom could be here for that, but the universe had different plans. But we do have artwork that is available for pre-sale, and I want to thank, we have a couple Da Vinci sponsors, Ann's Pet Sitting and Precision Surveying and Mapping. Precision Surveying and Mapping is a company that my husband had worked for many years, and they support us every year, and we're really grateful for that. So, Steve, this is kind of like a tables turned kind of thing, yeah. Sort of. I met Steve several years ago. Actually, it was at Community Service Council, and he came with his book. Steve is an author. He's a speaker, coach, mentor. For me, he's a mentor, coach, friend. We've known each other several years now, but I did first meeting at Community Service Council with, and I got his book, From Prison to Purpose, and it's even autographed. See, right. I saved the autographed one. So I met Steve before everything changed in my life, before Bobby's death, and probably about a year later, our cross passed again at another meeting, and I happened to be president of Business and Professional Women, and so we invited you to come and speak at our event. Although, even though I've seen you speak a couple times, there was one part of your story that I never heard you say until you were at Community Service Council, and of course it was after my husband's death by suicide. Yeah. So, you're from Tampa Bay, you live here, you grew up here, yeah. And I want you to share with people some of your story of what, it's even still hard for me to say for you, what led up to you at one point in your life contemplating suicide.
Yeah. Well, first, before I jump into that, I got to give it back to you because, you're somebody that I always talk about, always talk about the power of story and how sharing our stories and sharing our testimonies not only sets us free, but it sets those around us free, because when we share our stories and our testimonies and our ups and our downs and our struggles and the things that we've had to face, what we do is we open the door for other people to share their struggles and the things that they've been through, and when you do that, connections, deep connections, are made. And so I got to give it back to you, because I know for a long time you weren't sharing your story. And now look at everything that's happened, because you have decided to start sharing that story. And because of it, lives are being changed, lives are being saved, and people are being healed, and people are being set free. And all because Tammy White decided to share her story, and to start the Bobby White Foundation, and to start Art for Hope, and all of the things that Tammy White is doing that is impacting and changing lives out there. So,
well, and quite honestly, I shared last week that one of my mentors had passed away, and he was very influential in me having to get up and talk to people. But of course I didn't do it until, not knowing the trajectory of my life, what was going to happen. But this man here is the reason that Art for Hope was started, and the Bobby White Foundation, although the Bobby White Foundation was a surprise to him, because I did that behind his back. I didn't tell him. But Art for Hope was started because of him. So, and like I said last week, we can't go on or do this journey on our own.
right.
It takes other people, other friends, other understandings. And even though I'm your problem child, it's still
Yes,
still
you have
pulling
been.
me like.
You have been the problem child. But
But-
that's all right. The book is going to get done. I am speaking it into existence. Tammy will be getting her book done.
We weren't going to do that
this
until
year.
the end of the show, but I
Okay.
even did. I even brought, these are my notes to show you that it is
How many years ago was it that I told you were going to write a book?
probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, and then I'll sneak into one of his seminars every once in a while. I think the last one I snuck into last spring or something, early in the winter. And I snuck in and came over and talked to me. Of course, he watches on Facebook, and he's like,
Yeah.
"What are you doing crocheting?
Yeah.
You're supposed to be writing your book."
Supposed to be writing a book. Yeah.
So anyway,
right.
let's get back to
Okay,
you.
yes.
So let's tell people, I know your story very, very
Yeah.
well, but even every time you tell it, it changes the way I listen, and a lot of our viewers may not know your story and how impactful it is, and what you went through, because as a teenager, your life was devastated
Yeah.
for one reason.
Yeah. So I grew up, here in Tampa, and started playing football at a young age. That's what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't going to be a doctor, fireman, policeman. I was going to be a football player. And, had natural talent growing up, and gained the additional skill over the years, and got into high school, and opportunities were there for the taking. It was what I wanted to do with my life. I was going to be a football player, and the opportunities to go to the next level were there right in front of me. However, a split-second decision one night my senior year in high school would literally change the course of my life forever. I got invited to a party down in South Tampa, private beach, keg of beer, bunch of teenagers hanging out, drinking, doing what we had no business doing at 16 and 17 years old. And we had been at this party for a few, and argument ensued between one of the guys that had come to the party with me and a teenager from a rival high school. Big fight breaks out. I engage in the fight, and don't think anything of it at the time. It was just another Friday night, another fight, another party. Somebody yelled cops. Everybody runs to their cars, and we take off. Well, this Friday, this situation was going to be different than any others ever in the past, because 3 days after the event, or after the situation that Friday night, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department showed up at my parents' home with a warrant for my arrest. One of the teens that I had hit during that fight on Friday night had slipped into a coma. And at that moment, everything changed. my dad took me down, turned me into the county jail, and last thing he said to me before I walked through the door was, "Son, we're gonna get this figured out. We're gonna get it worked out. Hold your head up. Be strong. All that good stuff." A little pep talk before I went in there. But what he didn't realize, and what I didn't realize as I was walking through that door, was that the next morning the judge was actually going to revoke my bond because this young man was in a coma. They didn't know if he was going to live, didn't know if he was going to die. So my parents couldn't even bail me out. So here I was, senior year in high school, hopes of going off to college and playing football and doing all that. And there I am, senior year in high school, sitting in the county jail, just waiting to find out what my fate was going to be. And it was about 90 days in, I called home. My mom answered the phone crying and said, "Son, he came out of the coma, he's going to live." And it was the best news I'd ever heard in my life. But, when I speak at our high schools and middle schools and colleges to our youth, I always try to, share with them that when you make bad choices in life, there are almost always going to be bad consequences that come along with them. And for me, those consequences were going to be great. Make a long story short for your listeners and your viewers is that, for that one split-second decision, that one lapse in judgment, that one swing, they sentenced me at 17 years old to 10 years in Florida State Prison.
That's was the worst prison in our state, right?
Yeah, it was, I did. Nothing had prepared me for the world I was about to
Not
enter.
at 17.
No. I did get sent to the worst prison in the state of Florida at the time. Gang violence daily, riots almost weekly. People, stabbed to death, beat to death right in front of me. Fought for my life on numerous occasions, and saw some rough stuff in there. It was a whole different world. Nothing I had ever seen.
Yeah,
right?
not a kid from high school, middle class family, just everything
Right.
out of your, thinking you're gonna go play football,
Yeah.
and now you're in this alternate universe just about.
Yeah. So it was about a year into my incarceration, and it was lights out time, and that steel door slammed shut on that prison cell, sealing me in for the night. And there I was, pitch darkness, so dark I couldn't see a foot in front of my face. And this particular night, the weight of the world just came crashing in on me. I guess for the first year I had been kind of in survival mode,
Right.
like just going through the motions, just trying to make it. And this particular night, it just all came in on me, and as the emotions consumed me, I crouched down in the corner of the cell and began to cry, and just as I sat there in the corner of that cell, I felt like my life had no purpose and it had no meaning. Like everything I had worked for, everything I wanted, up until that point was gone. It was never going to return. It wasn't going to happen. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was 1 year into a 10-year sentence, and that year had been hell.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't think I was going to survive the next 9. And as I sat there, just these feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, fear, regret, remorse, all of them consuming me, I pulled my knees tight up to my chest and buried my head and began to cry. And for the first time in my life, the thought of suicide crossed my mind. I didn't feel like my life had any purpose left. Felt like it was over. And I began to contemplate how I was going to take my own life. And as I was sitting there contemplating suicide, I remembered something. There was something my granddad had told me, when I was a little kid. Yeah.
I knew that story.
I used to spend my summers at my grandparents' house, and my grandfather was a Christian, and he was always during those summer visits trying to, preach at me and impart these words of wisdom on me. And I was a knucklehead. I had my own agenda, and I didn't want to hear any of that, But so it was all kind of one ear and out the other, right? Well, one summer he got my attention, and he said, "Son," he said, "just promise me one thing." And I said, "Yeah, Granddaddy, what is it?" He said, "Just promise me that if you're ever at a dark moment in life and your back's against the wall and you don't feel like you have any way out, just drop to your knees immediately and cry out for Jesus." And I was like, "Okay, Granddaddy, sure.
Yeah,
Whatever you say, whatever." And I didn't think about it again, Tammy, until that night in that cell. That seed that he had planted just came to me that night as I'm sitting there contemplating taking my own life. I remembered what he said. I was in the darkest moment of my life. My back was against the wall. I didn't feel like I had any way out. And I took his advice because I didn't have anything to lose at that point. So I spun around on my knees and laid my face on that dirty concrete prison floor and cried like I never cried before in my life. And that night changed everything for me. It created an absolute shift in my life because that night when I took his advice and I called out, in an instant, everything changed because all the feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and fear and remorse and regret, like everything subsided, and I was filled with this feeling of peace and purpose. And I knew in that moment that God had a purpose for my life. Excuse me. And that there was something that I was going to go and do. And I knew in that moment that my life did have meaning and that I couldn't take it. Because if I did, I would never have the opportunity to go and see what it was.
And you wouldn't have changed so many people's lives in the years to come.
Oh, thank you for that.
You know, I mean, when I'd heard, different sections of your story, but when you were at Community Service Council, it was the first time that I had heard you share that part of the story.
Yeah.
And of course, it had been probably about a year after I lost Bobby to suicide. And it was weird how just the hairs on my arm stood up. And we hadn't really talked too much prior to that, but I was right there after the meeting and I remember. We got to talk.
I remember it just like it was yesterday. Actually, you came up and you had tears in your eyes as you began to tell me about your situation, and I, my heart went out to you in that moment. And in that moment, I knew, I was like, God, when I left there, I remember driving home and thinking to myself, okay, God, you put this Tammy White in my space. Like,
what the heck are you thinking?
What's the plan here? What are we going to do? And, I think, obviously, it was a while later on down the road. I think you had attended a few events when it started to manifest.
Yeah, it was slow. I'm a little bit stubborn with that. A little bit.
Well, you were grieving, and you were not ready yet to go and share that story. And one of the reasons that I talk about your story so often is because it's a perfect example of how God will use what the enemy meant to destroy, and he will take it and he will use it for a greater purpose. He will actually do good with what the enemy meant to destroy. And not only did the enemy mean to destroy Bobby, but he meant to destroy you.
Oh, most definitely. Because that I've always, my whole life, I've gone through some other really bad stuff. Nothing as bad as this with Bobby, but nothing in the past had completely brought me to my knees.
Yeah.
It took everything from me. My self-confidence, my passion for life, my passion for my work. Just everything.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but Steve just has a way of pulling it out of you.
Dragging it
whether you want to or not.
Kicking and screaming.
That's why I say I've always been his problem child, because it's like pulling a little, come on, Tammy, a little bit more. But isn't your story, you use, I remember, and I've heard this a couple times, because you speak at prisons, you speak at for corporations. I mean, just everything. But one time you were, and I think you were going to speak at this event for free. It was for a children's thing or something, and it was really super hot out, and you were doing it for free. Tell us about that, because this is part of the reason why I do what I do and what Steve does what he does.
Yeah. Because
you don't know who's going to be out there and who's going to need to hear what you have to say, even when you think nobody's listening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I will never forget this one, because it was such a valuable lesson for me, which was I got a call and I got asked to go and speak at a group home, which is, foster kids and nonprofit, not a lot of funds, government run, all of that kind of stuff. And I got this phone call that they were doing a fundraiser for the group home, at the group home, and they were going to do a carnival and all this stuff, and they wanted to have a guest speaker come out. And they said, we don't have any money to pay you, and we'd like you to come out and speak and share your story. And I was like, all right, I felt moved. I felt like God was calling me to go to this place and speak, right? And so I show up, and they've got a carnival going on, and it's August, like late August in Florida. And of course I'm dressed, I've got a suit on, and I'm ready to go rock and roll this thing. I have no idea that I'm going to be outside speaking, and that I'm going to be on a black stage outside
in the sun,
directly in the sun, with no roof, no nothing on this stage. And they had some bleachers set up out in front of the stage, and so they make an announcement over the intercom that there's a guest speaker at the stage, come hear him, right? Kind of that deal. And they introduce me, and I get up on stage, and there's a carnival going on.
Who's going to come and listen?
Who wants to come listen to a guest speaker when there's a carnival going on? And so I look at the bleachers in front of me, and there's one little old lady sitting on the bleachers, and it's obvious that she just needed a break from walking around the carnival. Like, she wasn't there to hear me, okay? Matter of fact, she had her body kind of positioned 3/4 so she could watch the carnival and, like, look at me every once in a blue moon, right? And so I delivered, like, I spoke as if there were 5,000 people sitting out there, right? And I got up and I shared my testimony, and I'm dripping sweat the entire time, and I was in complete misery as I was on the stage, and there was nobody listening. And I remember leaving the event and getting in my car, and I'm peeling off clothes as I'm driving down the road, because I'm burning up, I'm dying, about to die of a heat stroke. And I'm driving, and I'm complaining to God, like, okay, did I misinterpret the instructions? Like, why was I there? I'm complaining, never again will I take a free speaking gig in August outside. I should have asked more questions. I should have had all this dialed in. And just complaining the whole way. And all of a sudden my phone rings, and it's the director from the group home. And she wanted to thank me, for coming out and speaking, because I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her.
Because you just wanted to get out of there.
I wanted to get in air conditioning. And so she's like, thank you again for coming out. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. Right? Like, right? And she goes, I want to share something really, really quickly with you. She said, there's a young man in our group home. She said, both of his parents were addicts that died of overdoses. And his sister was also here as well. And his sister took her life probably about 6 months ago. And she said, and he has been really hard to deal with. He's been a real troubled youth, and we've really had a lot of struggles with him. Well, he actually woke up this morning and wrote a suicide letter. And his intention today was that while everybody was at the carnival, he was going to take his life. And she said, as he was going about this, he heard your voice over the loudspeaker. And it intrigued him. So he came outside, and she said,
I know you do this every single time. I know. But
she said he was standing behind a tree, off to the left. She said you probably didn't see him standing there. She said, but he listened to everything that you had to say. And she said, and after you left, he came to us and told us what his plan was, and that after hearing you, he decided that he didn't want to take his life because he felt like his life had purpose and it had meaning. And he asked us if we could help him get his life in order. And she said, I just wanted to share that with you.
you get teary every time you tell that story.
I do.
Every single time, I know.
Because here I am, driving
yeah.
home, complaining about being out in the heat, and that there was no huge audience to listen to me, and cursing God, saying, why'd you send me to this place, and all the while there was a young man standing behind a tree listening that decided not to take his life.
That's who you were there for.
That's what I was there for. Yeah. Yeah, so powerful, and it just goes right back to my purpose, my calling is to help people, to get their stories out there, because like I said at the very beginning, when we begin to share our stories, it opens the door for people to start sharing theirs. And it sets people free, and it impacts lives. And there's aspects of your story, Tammy, that are gonna, already have, saved lives or impacted people that are, survivors of people that,
Well, I've often, and I've mentioned it a couple times here, that when I finally spoke publicly, even just for the first time, it was probably about 1.5 years after Bobby died. And it was at a WPBA meeting, and I had 2 people right beside me, 2 girlfriends, and I could tell, and this happened quite often in the very beginning, is when people knew what I was going to talk about, you could feel the energy in the room change, you could watch their faces change, and it literally wasn't for the good part, and but I would go ahead, and I remember the very first time, and one of the girls standing right next to me, I'd known her for a few years and didn't even know. 3 people came up to me after that and thanked me, number one, and told me how suicide had affected their lives. One guy, he, at 2 different points in his life, had a gun in his mouth.
Yeah.
The gal standing next to me to help support me, she lost her mother to suicide when she was a teenager. And she never told me until that day.
Yeah.
And as time began to go on, and when I decided to do this with some encouragement from somebody, it still for a long time was the same kind of thing. People didn't want to hear it. You could feel the energy change. But still, every single time, at least one person would come up to me and thank me and share, quite often, something that they hadn't spoke about in years.
Right.
In years. Slowly, it has started to get, well, now everybody knows what I'm going to talk about. So now it's like, oh, Tammy White's here now. So it's not quite as bad. And I remember the last time that I spoke just before COVID was actually the day before, because I had finally started, getting more speaking engagements, and I think I had 4 in the first 3 months of the year. The last one just the day before we shut down for COVID, and it was at a Rotary Club, and a minister was there. And he came up to me afterwards, and he had lost his son to suicide 15 years prior to this time. He's a minister, and he never spoke about his son's death until he shared that with me. And I think that after that, I could feel it in him that he may now be open to share. But and this isn't something that I chose for this time in my life. I was supposed to be getting ready for retirement, Bobby's retirement. But I figure God puts people in places where you never expect, because this is not what I expected my life to be right now. And, and I'm sure that when we first met, this is not what you expected either.
No, you were Tammy White that had the framing company, and I was like, all right, if I ever need a picture framed, I'll give her a shout. But it progressed into something much more. I've had to do it probably a lot slower than what some people, just to save myself. Because I remember when we first started talking about Art for Hope, for instance, and I use this as an example quite often, because we have to make sure that we have self-care, which is really important when you are so deep into this. You wanted Art for Hope to be a black tie event to begin with. And I just remember standing there looking at you, and I was like, are you ready to lock me up in the loony bin? Because that's what would happen. So we're progressing. It's slowly, but and then COVID hit. But you guys would have had to lock me away a long time ago. It's still going to be a black tie event.
It eventually will. It will.
Yeah. Because listen, I don't know if you've been to any black tie charity events lately, but when they show up in tuxedos, they come out of the pocketbook, Tammy.
Right. No, I know.
They will buy all the art that's there, and they will throw more money at it.
It's coming. It's coming. And we may end up having maybe a 2-part, like a regular Art for Hope and then a fancy Art for Hope. It's going to come, but I mean, you see how I've progressed, and
but even listen, here's the thing: we're not discrediting Art for Hope by any means. I do actually see it being just a huge black tie event at some point in the future. But the Art for Hope that you've been doing for the past 6 or 7 years is spectacular. It's unbelievable. I mean, you walk into the room, and immediately you know that you're in a place that is good. You know that your time and if you choose to buy art when you're there, that your time and your money is being invested in something that literally is life-changing, like life-saving.
It is. We actually, I can't remember, I think it was the second one, because the second one was the last one we were able to have in person. Second one, third one, I can't remember. I had a broken arm. But, and I've told this story too before, that a gal had gone to a friend of mine's store and saw the Art for Hope little postcard thing, and she invited her friend. She's like, I want to go to this, but I usually don't go to things at night by myself, not knowing that her friend was a friend of mine. And so she said, let's go. And she didn't tell her that she knew me. So they came in, and she came into the woman's restroom. I was getting ready, and she introduced me to her friend, and she offered to brush my hair because I couldn't brush my hair because I had one arm. And so they had a really good time. The next morning, I get a phone call from her. And she said, Tammy, I have to tell you this. she said, I don't know what happened. She said, remember that friend I brought last night? And I'm like, yeah. I said, she was really nice. So she told me a little bit of the story, and I'm like, well, that's really cool. She goes, on the way home, she says, it's a good thing she was driving.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? She goes, yeah, because what she told me, I would have drove off the road. And I'm like, well, what happened? And she said, she had been planning to take her life. And after she heard our stories, us up there on the stage, she decided that she couldn't do that to her son.
Yeah.
So we immediately got her one of our purple folders. I chatted with my friend. I'm like, we need to get her she needs to talk to her son right away, which she did.
Yeah.
And to this day, she's still alive.
Nice.
You know, so,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one that I know of. And, like that little boy, I mean, we just don't know. It may be hard, and when we think we're doing something that, what are we doing? You know, but you can't really have that because you just you just don't know, you know. And I mean, I thank God every day for people like you, because it's been a super long and hard road for me. And I know that you've told me on several, why don't you call me? And, but you know, I'm stubborn, so it's just, I don't. You know, but then I see you every once in a while, I make an appearance, and then it's like, oh, that's so much better. But so really, I wouldn't even imagine of starting Art for Hope or starting the foundation. Now, the show, it took John 10 months to talk me into doing the show.
Yeah.
10 months. And
I feel your pain, John.
thankfully, I think he left. But he knows. Yeah, he knows, just like you. So, and then we started it during COVID because we couldn't go out and speak to people. And it was a lot of people didn't understand what was going to start happening to people when they were locked down and they couldn't be social and go out and do their normal things. And from the very beginning, I was making comments about it to people, and some people were like, oh no. And I was invited to be on a podcast for somebody, and I said, we really need to do this now. It was like right at the beginning. She goes, oh, Tammy, no, I don't think we do. There's too much bad stuff going on right now. I really don't think it's the right time. And I was just like, okay. She called me a month and a half later and was like, Tammy, we need to do the show. And I'm like, I didn't want to say I told you so, but and I didn't, but it was like, you know, this is real. And I'm glad that John kept on me to do it. It's evolved. This is our 110th episode.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
So
pretty awesome. Congratulations.
And it'll continue to evolve. In the beginning, it was probably more like a therapy session for me and my co-host. Because it was still in the beginning, you think, 2.5 years ago, I was still only less than 5 years out from Bobby's death. And my co-host was just a couple of years out from losing her grandson and her son. So in the beginning, it was even harder. It was harder for our tech guys. I mean, after our show, they would have to get up and go smoke a cigarette or go take a walk because it was like, oh God, how are we going to get through this? So, I mean, and it's evolved, and now I'm doing the show, and I get to get guests like you on, and I've had some really awesome guests, and I just because I mean, you've kind of put that bug in my ear and helped me, even though I'm not always around for some of your stuff. You kind of always know where I'm at and what I'm doing. It's behind the scenes. You're helping me all the time, even though you may not be in my physical space at the time. You know, and I know that if I need to, all I got to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, Steve, you know, I think I need to talk.
That's right.
But I seriously am grateful.
Put November 3rd
It
and
is on my
4th
calendar.
on your calendar.
It's on my calendar.
Huge women's event in Tampa. It's going to be extremely powerful. You're going to want to be there.
Actually, I think November 4th is the Out of the Darkness walk here in Pasco,
listen.
but I can be there in the afternoon.
Okay.
I will be there no matter what.
Okay.
I may have to see what part of that schedule is, but I already did put it on my calendar.
Work it out, work it out.
As soon as you told me on the phone, I put it on my calendar because
Good.
I will be there, and I'm hoping to do because I don't know if I should say it because they haven't told me, but I put my name in to be the MC for the Out of the Darkness walk for Pasco.
Ooh, nice.
So
Well, they
That's-
should totally have you do it.
that's really big, and that's
They should pick you.
that was kind of like part of the other reason why I called you a couple weeks ago,
Yeah.
because I was like, what did you do, Tam? I was like, oh no, what did you do?
Yeah.
But I was
awesome.
one of the guest speakers last year. They always have somebody that tells their story, and they tend to do parents who lost children. But in our community in Pasco County, the majority of the suicides are guys like you,
Yeah.
your age range. White guys, 45, 55 and older. That is the majority of the suicides in Pasco County.
Yeah.
And I made a comment to them. I'm like, why don't we need to have somebody that, does still do the kids, but we need somebody to represent the demographics of what is happening in our community.
Right.
Don't make a suggestion because you always get volunteered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the next thing I know, I was one of the speakers, which was good, and
Right.
and I think I did pretty good. I have a lot of practice and a lot of mentorship, even though I haven't totally finished 20-year courses, but that was COVID's fault.
Okay.
That was COVID's fault.
So what's next? What's next on the agenda for Tammy? Obviously writing the book. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I was only going to talk a little bit about it at the end, but you get me every single time. Well, and I don't know if I shared with you. I think I did at one point. I have a rough draft of the first chapter, and remember I told you that I lost it for a long time?
Yeah.
I had to have it handwritten out, and it's right here. And I did. I lost it.
Yeah.
It was actually at the time, it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I wrote it, and that's when, for the first time, I really went into a depression for the first time.
Yeah.
That was for about 5 months. And for some reason, I could never find this.
Yeah.
And fortunately, about 5 months into it, I realized what was happening to me. Mm-hmm. And I was able to recognize it, thankfully, because it's something that I had never felt. I mean, not even right after Bobby's death. This was like 3 years after Bobby died. And but I was able to recognize it several months later, and was able to pull myself out of it.
Yeah.
With some help. My aunt came down and stayed with me for a month because she could see what was happening.
Yeah.
And so she came and stayed with me for a month, and she wanted me to go to a doctor and get put on medication, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. We never even put Bobby on medication for his MS, ever. And so she was like, I'm going to give you 3 months to do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. So I did. Yeah. I mean, I kind of faked it some of the time, but and it's sometimes still a struggle. Yeah. I hope it's not always a struggle.
Yeah.
But anyway, it wasn't too long ago. And then whenever you'd mention it, I was like, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know where it's at.
I don't know where it's at.
And then not too long ago, actually, it was probably about 4 months ago, it all of a sudden showed up.
Well, what you experienced when you first started writing that is very common. You know, I've helped a lot of people write books and publish books, and most of the stories that are being shared are some hard stories, some heartbreaking stories, whether it's abuse, loss of a loved one, sexual abuse, you name it, the full gamut of bad things that have happened in people's lives. And a lot of times when we have trauma, bad things that happen to us in life, we tend to get so strong as human beings to cope with it that we don't ever really break down and just grieve over it, And so what happens is, a lot of times, is when we're like, okay, let's start writing your book. And what happens when you sit down and you start to write that book is as you start to describe and explain and tell the story, you begin to relive it. And because you did that whole I'm strong thing to survive that moment, and never really got to grieve, never really got to just break down and feel the pain, the full gamut of the pain. A lot of times that pain will resurface in that moment. And so it's important that when you are writing a book or you are getting ready to go out and share this story, that you have somebody in your life that is holding your hand and walking through that journey with you, somebody that's there when you maybe start to experience or re-experience that pain that you had suppressed from that moment.
I know, and that's what I didn't do.
That's what you didn't do. That's right. You didn't do that, and you went back into that place where you were going to deal with it all on your own. And so, anybody that's watching this or listening, I would say that, when you're ready and you're at that point, like Tammy, where you're going to start sharing that story of yours, that powerful story of yours that may be painful and it may be hard, and it may be hard to relive it. You're going to heal from it. You are. And in that healing process of telling that story, you're going to help others heal as well. But don't do it on your own. Because you have God, first and foremost. You have God that is there truly to walk you through every hurtful situation that you experience in this life. And then you need to have a mentor, somebody, a coach, a mentor, somebody in your life that is experienced in it, that will walk through that journey with you. A lot of times we think that, we've got to go to a clinical counselor or psychologist, and honestly, like, those people are great a lot of times, okay? However, I always say, don't work with anybody if they don't have scars and don't walk with a limp.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because if they've got scars and they walk with a limp, they've been through some stuff. A lot of times counselors, of course, they do the textbooks thing.
Right.
And I'm not, listen, go to a counselor if you need a counselor. I'm not discrediting counselors out there. But if you've got somebody who's been through some stuff in life and overcome some stuff in life and can guide you through that process and share with you how they did it, what they did to get through that, then it makes a big difference.
It does, and don't do what I did, because
you don't have to.
And the thing is I knew all along that all I had to do is reach out and call you, and I didn't do it. Yeah. And I probably, if I would have, saved myself a lot of grief in the meantime. Yeah. At least not having to deal with it totally on my own like I did, which it's going to be the same thing when I do this the way I'm supposed to.
Yeah. But we're going to do it right this time.
But we'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it.
We're going to do it right this time, and because of it, you're going to get to the other side of that, and you're going to see what's going to happen on the other side.
Well, and I think I'm finally, I mean, I've done a lot of work on myself the last couple of years, and even this year, I thought, because I thought things were going to be better, but then I was like, it's kind of like I used to describe it like I was going through a fog and there's a brick wall there.
Yeah.
But I've got through the fog and the brick wall is starting to break away, but there's still a little fog on the other side. And then lost my mom just before Christmas.
Yeah.
And even though we didn't have that great a relationship, she felt we had a better relationship than what we actually had. But I'm glad that was her. That's how she felt.
Yeah.
I wanted her to feel that way. But it still took a toll because you have only one mom.
Yeah.
Whether you have a super awesome relationship or you don't, she's the only mom you'll ever have.
Yeah.
And so that was hard dealing with that too, because I lost my dad 5 weeks before I lost Bobby.
Yeah.
And so her and I kind of went through some of this stuff together, and my birthday's in a couple weeks, and it's going to be my first birthday without my mom.
Happy birthday.
Well, thanks. Well, and my birthdays have always been bittersweet because it's also mine and Bobby's anniversary.
Oh, geez.
So,
Yeah.
but I think that finally, and I think that's why this appeared, even though I've let it sit for a few months, it finally showed up again, because I think I'm finally getting to that point where I'm more ready for it now than really what I was, a few years ago.
Yeah. And, here's the thing. You got to know going into it, though, that, when I say the enemy, I'm talking about the devil.
Oh, I know.
And the devil doesn't want you to share this story because the devil would love for people to take their lives. He would love that. He would absolutely love for people to think that there's no hope.
Right.
To think that there's no future. To think that there's no way out of their situation. He would love for them to think that that is a solution to the problems they may be facing or experiencing. And so he does not want you to write this book.
Right. No, I agree.
And so when we get started back with this process again, he's going to throw a lot of stuff at you. And you need to know that going into it. Is that he's going to throw stuff at you. And because he doesn't want you to do this.
Well, I think like I said, I think I'm more prepared now, and I won't try and do it by myself like I did last time, because I know that you're there and you are always there, and I just...
Well, there's a scripture, Revelations 12:11, and it's a scripture that I've been really standing on hardcore in helping people get their testimonies out there, and it's Revelations 12:11. It says, "They triumphed over him being the devil, they triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus, and by the words of their testimonies." That's how you beat him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus and your testimony.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Well, that's how you beat him.
That's how I beat him. That's how you're going to beat him.
I will.
That's how everybody's going to beat him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still hard, but I mean, if I can get up here almost every single week and do this,
Yeah.
and it is getting better, and help people, just to let them know that you don't have to walk this alone.
No.
Well, even though some of us try to do what we do, but
Well, I'm proud of you. And like I said, every time, I talk about you often. I talk about you often. When I talk about, the power of sharing our stories and our testimonies, you are you were the poster child for me, like, because you are sharing your story. I shared mine with you. You heard it, it impacted you, and now you've created all of this and more because you're now sharing yours. And there are going to be things that are going to come from you sharing your story, sharing Bobby's story, sharing your story. There are things that are going to come from that you may never see, but that have eternal impact.
Yeah.
Eternal impact. And you just need to hold on to that every day. When you want to quit, when you think maybe nobody's watching, nobody's listening, nothing's happening, hold on to that what you're doing is going to have eternal impact. So I encourage you, keep going.
I hope so. I'm sure. It's I want Bobby to live on in a different way.
Yeah.
And that one day wasn't
Wasn't Bobby.
That wasn't Bobby.
Right.
And he was much more than that, and that's why I just have to keep plugging along.
Yep.
Keep plugging along. So I picked out I always try and do like a positive quote at the end of the show.
Okay.
So, and usually I try and do it try and see how I can gear it towards my guest. And this one, and it was the same verse in different images. So, Cage, can you pull up my happy quote or my positive quote? You gotta faith it till you make it.
That's right. I love it.
Now, usually I show that at the end, but okay. So let's show the lifeline numbers, and please be sure you put these in your phone. Have them available. You just never know when you're gonna need them. So let's put up "Faith It Till You Make It" one more time, just really, really fast. I know I'm making you really work, Cage. I'm sorry. But it's just so pretty.
Nice.
Okay, that's it. That's good, Cage. So now we always end the show with, remember, there's always hope. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you.